Welcome back to another English listening practice video. Today's story will help you learn new vocabulary and improve your comprehension naturally. Listen carefully and prepare to change your mindset with the life lessons of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein is widely known as the most famous scientist in human history. He completely transformed the way we understand space, time, gravity, and the universe. But before he became a legendary genius, he was just a quiet, misunderstood boy. His remarkable journey proves that curiosity is far more important than raw talent. Albert was born in Germany in a small town called Ulm. As a very young child, he did not speak a single word for years. His parents grew incredibly worried and thought there was something wrong with him. He didn't enjoy playing typical games with the other neighborhood children at all. Instead, he preferred to sit alone and look at nature with deep focus. When Albert was 5 years old, his father showed him a small pocket compass. The young boy watched the mysterious magnetic needle move around in total amazement. No matter which way he turned the metal case, the needle pointed north. This simple experience created a powerful spark of deep curiosity in his young mind. He realized there were hidden forces in the universe that he couldn't see. He wanted to understand those invisible laws more than anything else in life. For intermediate English learners, this is where true personal growth always begins. School, however, was an incredibly difficult and painful experience for young Albert. The schools in Germany during that time were very strict and extremely rigid. Students were forced to memorize facts without asking any creative questions at all. The teachers demanded absolute obedience and hated when Albert questioned their authority. Albert felt completely trapped, just like a bird stuck inside a cage. One of his teachers even told him that he would never achieve anything. They believed his constant daydreaming was a sign of a very weak mind. But Albert was not lazy. His mind was simply exploring much bigger ideas. He loved to read complex books about mathematics and science at home. By the age of 12, he taught himself advanced geometry completely alone. He realized that nature could be understood through the beautiful language of numbers. He chose to follow his own unique path instead of obeying school rules. When Albert was a teenager, his family faced serious financial difficulties. They decided to move to Italy to find better business opportunities. Albert stayed behind in Germany alone to finish his high school education. But he felt so miserable and lonely that he eventually left without a degree. He joined his family in Italy and enjoyed the freedom of the beautiful countryside. He spent his days walking in nature, thinking about light and energy. He decided to apply to a famous university in Zurich, Switzerland. Because he did not have a high school diploma, he had to take an entrance exam. Albert easily passed the mathematics and science sections with perfect scores. However, he failed the history, languages, and geography parts of the test. The university president saw his incredible potential in science and gave him advice. He told Albert to finish a local high school before applying again next year. Albert followed the advice and successfully entered the university a year later. He enjoyed his university days because he could finally focus on physics. He met a brilliant young woman named Mileva Merrick in his physics class. She shared his deep passion for science, and they studied complex books together. When Albert graduated from the university, he expected to become a professor. But his old university professors did not like his independent attitude. He often skipped classes to study advanced modern physics theories on his own. Because of this, none of his teachers wrote him a recommendation letter. For 2 long years, Albert could not find any academic work at all. He lived in near poverty and felt like a complete failure to his family. He tutored young children for a small amount of money just to buy bread. It was an incredibly dark and challenging time in his young life. Finally, a close friend helped him secure a very simple, low-paying job. He became a clerk at the official government patent office in Bern, Switzerland. A patent office is a place where inventors send their new designs for approval. Albert's job was to read these designs and check if they actually worked. The patent office job turned out to be a hidden blessing for Albert. He quickly learned to analyze the mechanical designs in just a few hours. Once his official work was completely finished, he secretly opened his desk drawer. Inside, he kept scrap pieces of paper covered in complex physics equations. In that quiet office, without any fancy laboratories, Albert did his greatest thinking. He began to wonder what it would look like to ride alongside a beam of light. According to traditional physics, the laws of the universe were fixed and absolute. But Albert started to realize that the old theories had huge, unseen mistakes. The year 1905 became known as Albert Einstein's miracle year. While still working as a simple clerk, he published 4 revolutionary scientific papers. Any single one of these papers was enough to change human history forever. He was only 26 years old and completely unknown to the scientific community. In his first paper, he proved that light acts like tiny packets of energy. This discovery eventually led to the development of modern television and solar power. In his second paper, he proved the actual existence of tiny, invisible atoms. Before this, many famous scientists didn't believe atoms were real physical objects. But it was his third paper that completely shook the entire foundation of science. He introduced his famous theory of special relativity to the world. He explained that time and space are not fixed or the same for everyone. If you travel incredibly fast through space, time actually moves slower for you. In his fourth paper, he introduced the most famous mathematical equation in history. The equation is E-ec, which explains the deep relationship between mass and energy. It proved that even a tiny piece of matter contains an absolutely massive amount of power. With the pencil and paper, a lonely clerk had unlocked the deepest secrets of the universe. At first, the scientific world completely ignored his revolutionary ideas. They couldn't believe a simple patent clerk could solve problems that top professors couldn't. But slowly, a few famous physicists realized that Einstein's math was completely flawless. Letters of admiration began arriving at his small apartment, changing his life forever. By 1909, the scientific community could no longer ignore his genius. Albert finally left his simple job at the patent office for good. He was appointed as a full professor of physics at the University of Zurich. The university professors who once rejected him now welcomed him with open arms. But Albert was not satisfied with just solving special problems about light. He wanted to tackle the biggest mystery in the universe, gravity. For over 200 years, everyone accepted Sir Isaac Newton's laws of gravity. Newton said gravity was an invisible pulling force between objects, but he didn't explain how it worked. Albert spent 10 long years thinking, calculating, and failing to find the answer. He faced intense stress, relationship problems, and ultimate exhaustion during this time. Many times he wanted to give up because the mathematics felt completely impossible. But true geniuses do not quit when a problem becomes incredibly difficult. In 1915, he finally revealed his masterpiece, the theory of general relativity. He explained that space and time are joined together like a giant fabric. Massive objects like the sun do not pull on planets with an invisible string. Instead, they dent and bend the actual fabric of space around them. To understand this easily, imagine placing a heavy bowling ball on a flexible trampoline. The heavy ball makes a deep sink in the middle of the soft material. If you roll a small marble across the trampoline, it rolls around the heavy ball. Albert proved that gravity is just the bending of space and time. This meant that even light beams would bend when passing near a massive star. Scientists were highly skeptical because this completely contradicted the old physics rules. They needed real, undeniable proof before they could accept this wild new theory. The perfect opportunity for proof came during a total solar eclipse in 1919. A famous British scientist traveled to a remote island to photograph the stars during the eclipse. If Einstein was right, the gravity of the sun would bend the light of distant stars behind it. When the measurements were analyzed, the positions of the stars had shifted exactly as Albert predicted. The headlines of global newspapers screamed, "Einstein's theory triumphs." To truly understand how Albert's mind developed, we must look closer at his earliest years. His mother, Pauline, was a talented musician who loved classical piano music deeply. She insisted that Albert learn to play the violin when he was only 6 years old. At first, Albert absolutely hated the strict discipline and constant repetition of music lessons. He even threw a heavy chair at his first music teacher out of sheer frustration. But everything changed completely when he discovered the beautiful sonatas of Mozart. He realized that music was not just a rigid set of boring rules to follow. Music was an emotional and deeply mathematical language that connected with the universe. The violin became his closest lifelong companion, comforting him during his darkest moments. Whenever he felt completely stuck on a complex physics problem, he would play music. He would play his violin for hours until the scientific answer suddenly came to him. While his creative mind was growing at home, his school life remained a total disaster. His teachers hated his slow style of thinking and his constant, intense daydreaming. Albert did not think in words like most ordinary children do. He thought in vivid pictures. When asked a question, he would see a complex visual moving picture inside his head first. Then he would translate that visual picture into words, which took a long time. This made him look slow and confused to teachers who only valued rapid memorization. One headmaster explicitly told his father that Albert would never be successful at anything. This harsh judgment could have easily crushed the confidence of any ordinary young teenager. But Albert's father, Herman, consistently believed in his son's unique, quiet nature. Herman ran a small electrochemical business that manufactured dynamos and electrical lights. Albert spent hours watching the workers install complex electrical wiring and heavy machines. He became fascinated by how electricity could travel invisibly through long copper wires. He began to realize that the visible world was completely controlled by hidden, invisible laws. This childhood environment laid the perfect foundation for his future scientific discoveries. When his father's business failed completely in Germany, the family moved to Milan, Italy. Albert was left behind in a strict boarding house to finish his boring high school classes. The rigid military discipline of this school became completely unbearable for the creative teenager. He felt his mental health declining rapidly and decided to take a dangerous risk. He convinced a local doctor to write an official medical note about his extreme exhaustion. Using that note, 16-year-old Albert dropped out of school and took a train to Italy. His parents were deeply shocked and incredibly worried about his lack of a formal future. But for Albert, those months in Italy were the most liberating time of his entire youth. He spent his days walking through the beautiful mountains and visiting historic art museums. He completely taught himself advanced calculus by reading old textbooks during long afternoons. It was during this unstructured vacation that he wrote his very first scientific essay. He asked a question that no scientist had ever dared to ask before that moment. What would happen if you chased a beam of light at the exact speed of light? If you ran alongside it, would the wave of light look completely frozen to your eyes? This simple thought experiment became the seed that would eventually change human history. When his family could no longer afford to support his carefree lifestyle, reality hit hard. He traveled to Switzerland to attempt the entrance exam for the famous Zurich Polytechnic. As we know, he failed the general subjects miserably, but completely aced the mathematics. The physics professor was so stunned by Albert's scores that he personally intervened. He arranged for Albert to spend a year at a progressive high school in a quiet Swiss village. This school was completely different from the strict, rigid institutions in Germany. The teachers encouraged independent thinking, personal observations, and visual imagination. Albert loved this supportive environment and successfully finished his diploma within a year. He returned to Zurich and finally entered the university as a regular physics student. He was confident that he was finally on the right path to becoming a great scientist. But university life brought a whole new set of difficult challenges for the young rebel. Albert rarely attended the official physics lectures because he found them incredibly outdated. He preferred to stay in his rented room, reading the newest theories of modern physicists. He relied completely on the detailed study notes of his loyal classmate, Marcel Grossman. Without Marcel's perfect notes, Albert would have failed his university exams completely. After graduating from the university, Albert entered the darkest period of his early life. He watched his classmates get prestigious jobs at universities while he received nothing but rejection. He wrote dozens of letters to top professors all over Europe, begging for a teaching assistant position. Most of his letters were completely ignored, and the few replies he got were polite rejections. His father's business had failed again, meaning Albert could not ask his family for financial help. He felt like a massive financial burden to his parents and a complete failure to the world. To survive, he moved to the city of Bern and took temporary jobs tutoring young school students. He made so little money that he often survived on just a few pieces of dry bread and tea. The constant hunger and intense stress began to severely damage his physical health for months. During this painful time, his father became terribly ill back in Italy and passed away. On his deathbed, his father still believed that Albert was a failure who could not find a path. This heavy emotional guilt broke Albert's heart and stayed with him for the rest of his life. Just when things seemed completely hopeless, his loyal university friend Marcel Grossman stepped in. Marcel talked to his own father, who had high-level connections inside the Swiss government. Through this connection, Albert was finally offered an interview at the Federal Patent Office in Bern. The director of the patent office looked at Albert's messy clothes and unusual academic record. He decided to give the desperate young man a chance, but hired him at the lowest possible rank. Albert became a technical expert class 3, which was just a fancy name for a simple clerk. His daily job was to sit at a small wooden desk for 8 hours and look at new inventions. He had to read long, boring descriptions of new machines, visual blueprints, and complex designs. Many people would find this repetitive office work incredibly boring and soul-crushing for a scientist. But for Albert, this simple government job was the greatest hidden blessing of his entire life. It gave him total financial security, a steady income, and saved him from near starvation. More importantly, the job trained his unique mind to look at problems in a completely new way. He had to find the core scientific truth inside every messy invention design very quickly. He became so efficient at his work that he could finish his daily tasks in just 3 hours. The director of the office thought Albert was working hard at his desk the entire day. But once his official files were cleared, Albert would secretly open his lower desk drawer. He would pull out his hidden, private notebooks covered in wild, revolutionary physics equations. In that quiet government office, a lonely clerk was preparing to rewrite the laws of the universe. Sitting at his quiet desk, Albert began to challenge the ideas of the great Isaac Newton. For centuries, everyone believed that time was exactly the same for every single person in the universe. People assumed that a clock on Earth ticked at the exact same speed as a clock near a distant star. But as Albert analyzed patents for synchronized clocks and trains, a radical new thought struck him. He realized that time is not an absolute constant. Instead, it depends entirely on your motion. To understand this deep concept, he imagined a highly famous visual thought experiment. Imagine you're sitting inside a fast-moving train that is traveling smoothly down the tracks. If your friend is standing completely still on the platform, they see the train rush past them. If two bolts of lightning strike the front and back of the train at the exact same moment, what happens? To your friend on the platform, both lightning bolts appear to hit at the exact same time. But to you inside the moving train, you are actually rushing toward one bolt and away from the other. Therefore, you will see the lightning in front of you strike a tiny fraction of a second earlier. Both you and your friend are telling the absolute truth, yet you experience different realities. Albert realized that simultaneous events do not exist in a fixed, absolute way across the universe. This meant that time itself is completely relative to how fast you are moving through space. He stayed up late into the night for weeks, his small apartment covered in messy mathematical equations. He barely slept, forgot to eat his meals, and smoked his pipe continuously while thinking. His brilliant mind was pushing past the absolute boundaries of human knowledge and old physics rules. When he finally put the pieces together, he discovered that space and time are deeply woven together. They form a smooth, flexible, four-dimensional fabric that scientists now call space-time. If you travel incredibly fast through this fabric, your personal clock will actually tick much slower. If an astronaut travels near the speed of light for a year, decades could pass back on Earth. This wild idea sounded completely like a crazy science fiction story to ordinary people at the time. But Albert's mathematics were completely flawless, beautiful, and absolutely undeniable. He packaged these world-changing concepts into his famous 1905 paper on special relativity. He mailed the finished manuscript to the leading physics journal in Germany with a pounding heart. He knew that if the professors accepted it, the world of science would never be the same again. But if they rejected it, he would remain a lonely, unknown patent clerk for the rest of his life. He walked back to his small office desk, picked up his regular patent files, and waited quietly. The fuse had been lit, and the absolute foundation of human history was about to explode with genius. After mailing his revolutionary papers, Albert waited with intense anxiety every single day. He checked his small mailbox every afternoon, expecting a massive wave of letters from top professors. He thought the entire scientific community would immediately celebrate his beautiful equations. But weeks turned into long months, and the silence from the university world was completely deafening. The famous physicists of Europe simply ignored the papers written by an unknown Swiss clerk. They looked at the return address on the envelope, saw a federal patent office, and threw it aside. Albert felt a deep, familiar sense of rejection sinking back into his heavy heart. He began to wonder if his mathematical calculations contained some massive, hidden mistake. But he refused to lose faith in his vision and kept studying hard during his free office hours. Then a single letter arrived that completely changed the direction of his destiny forever. The letter was from Max Planck, the most powerful and respected theoretical physicist in Germany. Planck had read Albert's paper on relativity and recognized its absolute breathtaking genius. He did not care that Albert was just a poor clerk. He saw a mind that had surpassed Isaac Newton. Planck began lecturing about Einstein's theories to his own university students in Berlin. Slowly, other young, ambitious scientists started reading the patent clerk's work with deep curiosity. A brilliant young physicist named Max von Laue decided to travel to Bern to meet this new genius. He walked into the Grand Patent Office, expecting to find a distinguished, well-dressed professor. Instead, the secretary pointed toward a messy desk where a young man sat in a wrinkled suit. Albert looked up with a warm, humble smile, his wild hair flying in every direction. They spent hours walking through the city streets, intensely debating the deepest secrets of the universe. More letters of admiration began trickling into Albert's small, crowded apartment in Bern. Yet, despite this growing academic respect, universities still refused to offer him a teaching job. He applied for a position as a lecturer at the University of Bern, but was initially rejected. The university committee complained that his revolutionary thesis paper was far too short and confusing. Albert had to continue working his 8-tower clerk job just to buy milk and bread for his family. He was living a strange double life, a simple, low-ranking government employee by day, and a rising scientific superstar by night. He would finish analyzing mechanical typewriter patents, wash the black ink off his hands, and then write letters to the greatest minds in Europe. This intense hustle lasted for 4 more years until the academic world could no longer ignore the truth. In 1909, a university finally created a permanent space for him, forcing him to leave his beloved desk drawer behind. Albert finally walked out of the patent office as a full professor at the University of Zurich. He was deeply excited to spend all his time teaching eager young minds and doing research. His teaching style was completely different from the strict, rigid professors of his childhood. He did not use dense, boring scripts or demand that his students memorize empty facts. Instead, he used a chalk piece to draw simple visual pictures and jokes on the blackboard. He loved taking his students to local cafes after class to discuss deep physics problems over coffee. The students absolutely adored his humble nature, his warm smile, and his messy sweaters. But while his teaching life was going wonderfully, his mind was facing an immense scientific wall. His special theory of relativity was incredibly beautiful, but it had one massive, hidden flaw. It only worked perfectly for objects moving at a steady, constant speed in a straight line. It could not explain acceleration, and it completely failed when applied to the force of gravity. According to Isaac Newton, gravity was an instant pulling force that traveled across space completely instantly. But Albert's own theory proved that nothing in the universe, not even gravity, could travel faster than light. This meant that Newton's classic laws and Einstein's new equations were fighting a massive war. One of them had to be completely wrong, and Albert was determined to find the true answer. He began a grueling 10-year journey to expand his theory into general relativity. This period was the most intensely stressful and exhausting chapter of his entire personal life. He moved from Zurich to Prague and finally to the Grand University in Berlin, chasing better research opportunities. His intense obsession with gravity began to severely damage his relationship with his wife, Mileva. She felt completely lonely and abandoned because Albert spent every waking hour staring at equations. Eventually, his marriage collapsed entirely, and Mileva moved back to Switzerland with their 2 young sons. Albert was left completely alone in a dark, quiet apartment in the middle of a war-torn Berlin. He worked like a man possessed, completely forgetting to eat for days and smoking his pipe continuously. His friends grew deeply terrified that his intense mental exhaustion would cause a permanent physical breakdown. Many times, his mathematical calculations led him into completely blind alleys and devastating failures. Other famous scientists told him to give up because the complex mathematics felt totally impossible to solve. They believed that Newton's ancient laws were a perfect foundation that could never be broken by anyone. But Albert's childhood curiosity had taught him to never trust authority without demanding absolute truth. He knew the universe was hiding a beautiful, simple secret, and he refused to close his eyes. With a shaking hand and a tired mind, he prepared for one final, desperate push against the laws of nature. Overnight, the quiet, daydreaming boy became the most famous person on Earth. Everywhere he went, massive crowds of people gathered just to see his face. Journalists followed him constantly, asking for his wise opinions on everything. He won the prestigious Nobel Prize in Physics for his incredible discoveries about light. Despite his immense global fame, Albert remained a very simple and humble man. He famously hated wearing tight suits, formal ties, and uncomfortable socks. He preferred baggy trousers, old sweaters, and messy, uncombed white hair. He believed that inner thoughts were much more valuable than outer appearances. He often used his global fame to speak out for world peace and human rights. During the 1930s, dangerous political changes began to rise rapidly across Germany. Because of his background and beliefs, Albert's life was in serious danger. He decided to leave his homeland forever and move to the United States. He accepted a lifelong position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. There, he spent his final decades working on an incredibly ambitious new dream. He wanted to find a single equation that could explain every force in the universe. He called this grand, impossible goal the unified field theory. He worked on this theory every single day until the very end of his life. Even on his hospital bed, he kept his notebook and pencil close to his hands. He never managed to finish that final equation before his death in 1955. But his unfinished work inspired generations of future scientists to keep searching. Albert Einstein's brain was completely different, but not because of its size. Scientists later discovered that the parts of his brain handling math were highly developed. This was the direct result of decades of intense, focused curiosity and deep thinking. He famously said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." Every time you practice English, you are building new pathways in your mind. True learning does not happen by just memorizing rigid rules in a crowded classroom. It happens when you ask creative questions and stay deeply curious about the world. Your mind has unlimited potential, so never stop exploring its amazing power.